Was the bearded, fair-skinned god of ancient Peru real? The one they called Viracocha? And was he Jesus Christ? Welcome to another episode of Discovering the Book of Mormon through Science and Exploration. Some pseudo-academics claim that the oral tradition of the bearded, fair-skinned god that visited ancient Peru was somehow fabricated by the natives trying to please their Spanish overlords long after the Spanish conquest of Peru. But what are their motives? I suspect that is an attempt to suppress evidence that Christ visited ancient Peru in order to boost their theories that the Book of Mormon took place in other locations in the Americas. The very thought of trying to negate historical facts that support the Book of Mormon, a second witness of Jesus Christ, is very disconcerting. These ill-advised authors argue that the name Viracocha does not appear in the Spanish records until 20 years after the Spanish conquest of Peru. Thus, they say, Viracocha must have been fabricated by the natives after the conquest to please their Catholic priest. Theirs is one of the most naive arguments ever proposed. Here are 5 reasons why they are dead wrong. First, the earliest Spanish historians knew that the belief in the fair-skinned god predated the arrival of the Spanish. In his book, The Incas, Pedro Cieza de León wrote in 1554, just 20 years after the conquest, that the belief in Viracocha not only predated the arrival of the Spanish, it predated the Incas. He wrote, "Before the Incas came to reign in these kingdoms, or were known there, these Indians tell a thing that far exceeds all else they say. They state that a long time went by in which they did not see the sun, and that they suffered great hardships from the lack, and that they made great prayers and vows to those they held to be their gods, imploring them that the light that they had failed. When things stood like this, there emerged from the island of Titicaca, which lies in the great lake of the Cola, the sun in its splendors, at which all rejoiced. And after this had occurred, they say that out of the regions of the south there came and appeared among them a white man, large in stature, whose air and person aroused great respect and veneration. And this man, whom they saw in this guise, had great power, making plains of hills, and of the plains high mountains, and bringing forth springs in the living rocks. When they saw his power, they called him the Maker of all things." When the Peruvian Indians were asked how they knew of this white god, they replied, they had heard it from their forefathers, who, in turn, had heard it in old songs that had come down to them. Pedro Cieza de León, 1553. Second, the Catholic priests wanted nothing to do with the Peruvians' bearded, fair-skinned god. They feared the idea that Christ had been in ancient Peru and strongly repressed anyone teaching about Viracocha. The priests fought with all their powers against the oral traditions of Viracocha and sentenced to death people who openly believed and taught of him. Even though some of the priests might have taught that Viracocha was Christ, I believe the Spanish knew exactly who the bearded white god was, and that they feared that by exposing Christ's earlier teachings to the ancient Peruvians would expose their false and idolatry-based teachings of Christianity. So intimidated were the Catholic officials of the Peruvians' faith in Viracocha that the training manual for Jesuit missionaries, called the Extirpation of Idolatry, instructed their missionaries that
Their very first duty upon entering a village was to get their hands on the legend of Huaca, the image of Viracocha, and destroy it. Christ in Peru. Again, the Catholic Church sentenced to death those who openly taught of Viracocha. Yet, the natives of Peru never lost their history and testimony of their bearded, fair-skinned God. That should be proof enough that Jesus Christ visited Peru, that he was real.
Third, some priests realized that the Incas were practicing Christianity long before the Spanish conquest. Their lord, Viracocha, Christ, must have been the one who taught them Christianity. The recent discovery of a secret Jesuit document known as the Quito manuscripts gives details about the beliefs of the Andean people before Columbus. A few Quechua-speaking Jesuit priests recorded their discussions with the ancient sages and translated ancient quipus, the Peruvian string writing system. According to anthropologist Laura Menilli, the Jesuits believed there was a very ancient evangelization of the Americas that permits us to consider the Incas not as pagans but as ancient Christians, whose doctrine, therefore, only had to be updated, and the Inca world had been evangelized in very ancient times, so much so that their religion still had traits of Christianity and its organization. In his book, The House of the Lord, Dr. Van Evans rightfully concludes, colonial history reveals an active agenda by the Spanish to destroy temples, religious artifacts, sacred vestments, manuscripts, and quipus that link the Inca people to ancient Christianity. The Jesuits, or Society of Jesus, is a religious order grounded in education and in the love of the Savior. More than one courageous Jesuit or priest paid a dear price for taking a stance that the Incas were indeed Christian and that they only needed a restoration of the true gospel. These priests were brought before the Inquisition, tortured, imprisoned, banished, and their texts disappeared. While the goal to extirpate idolatry was never fully realized, it did successfully remove for a time the belief that Christianity existed among the Incas and ancient Andeans, and that Viracocha was the one true God, Jesus the Christ. Fourth, not one singular person nor group told the Spanish about the oral tradition of Viracocha. The Spanish discovered that not only did the tradition of a bearded, fair-skinned God predate their arrival in South America, they came to realize that the oral tradition of Viracocha, the bearded white god, was found throughout the entire continent of South America. From Colombia in the north, through Ecuador to Peru and Bolivia, to Brazil and Paraguay, and as far south as Argentina and Chile. The memory of the Lord's visit to the Andes was ingrained in the hearts of the people, and they passed that memory down to their children, where it was ingrained in their hearts for some 1,500 years until the Spanish tried to eliminate it. As a young missionary in Bolivia and Peru, I realized that memory is still alive today. Fifth, the archaeological record proves without a doubt that the oral tradition of a fair-skinned bearded god is based in fact, and he was the god of the native Peruvians, who worshipped him before the Spanish arrived. Thousands of pre-Columbian artifacts show his image, some date as far back as 2170 BC, the period of the Jaredites. Take, for example, the shield of Viracocha that the Spanish destroyed in Cusco, or the life-size statue of Viracocha that stood in the Cusco temple and in the great temple of Viracocha at La Raya, or his image on the famous Gate of the Sun in Tiwanaku, Bolivia, or the natural images the Andean people worshipped long before the Spanish arrived. Finally, we have the statement of President Russell M. Nelson when teaching 5,825 missionaries in Brazil. He said that an effective way to talk about the Book of Mormon with those who are not members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is ask if they know about the mission of Jesus Christ to the people of South America. I testify that the god Viracocha of Peru was real, and that he walked among the ancients in Peru, Bolivia, and other parts of the Americas, and that he was Jesus Christ. Discover more about the Book of Mormon by subscribing to this channel. It is free, and you can do so by clicking the link below. Or you can visit our website, christinperu.com. That's one word, christinperu.com, where you can learn about our books and our tours to Peru. Thank you.